Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Tyrone Brown, and I will be doing the Introduction to Data Quality Services webinar this morning. Just to start, just a little bit about myself, my professional life. I am a senior business intelligence developer. I have about 15 years of experience working with Microsoft SQL Server, pretty much the entire Microsoft Business Intelligence stack, which would be SQL Server, integration services, reporting services, analysis services. And I'm also a certified Microsoft database developer. And I have a math computer science degree from Bloomsburg University in Pennsylvania. And about me personal, I reside in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So my hobbies are I play the guitar, I like bowling, I'm a fairly good bowler, and traveling and fishing are some things I do in my free time. So for today, it's data quality services. This is pretty much an introduction. Even if you have some knowledge of DQS, you should hopefully find some useful information in this webinar. So we're going to go through 3 basic lessons here. First, we're going to set up a knowledge base, which is going to contain information about your database, your data. And then we're going to use the data quality client to actually clean your data using the knowledge base that you set up. And time permitting, I'm also going to do the exact same task in lesson 2 using SQL Server integration services. There's actually a DQS task within SQL Server integration services that allows you to do the cleansing. Right here, I'll show you this page now, even though it says conclusion. I do have a blog, and the address is there. It's called Natron to SQL. And there is my email address also. If anyone needs to reach out to me or ask me any questions, feel free to email me. And I like to be pretty quick on the slides, so that's pretty much it for the slides. We're just going to go dive right into the demonstration here. Let me go back one. The first thing is, what is data quality services? In a nutshell, it's a new feature in SQL 2012 that allows you to collect data about your data, which is metadata, and then use that data to clean the data that's coming in to make it better. The DQS has there are 2 main parts of it. The first part is the knowledge base, is where you store the data about your data. And another part of it would be called domains. And those domains, to make it simple, they're just columns that are coming in your data. So certain columns, maybe first name, last name, state, things like that, can be considered the domains. So what I'm going to do is dive right into this here. So I'm going to close this out. Okay, so for data quality services, you have what is a data quality services client. So all of the work you're going to do in your knowledge base will be done through this client. It's actually built into SQL Server. And it's for this icon here. You can find it in your start menu. It has to be installed. Sometimes if you haven't used this before, it's part of the SQL Server installation. So if you don't see the data quality client, you will have to install that, and I'll actually show that in a second. So if we start here, the data quality services, it's going to ask you to connect to a server. So you basically just hit connect, and if you have data quality services installed, it's going to bring you up to the screen. And this is what pops up for me. I knew this was coming up. You'll get this error if you don't have it installed. So it just says that you do not have DQS installed. There's no database to connect to. So what you can do is, I want to start from the beginning. You can go to your SQL Server 2012 installation media and go through the setup, and you can add DQS, or you can actually do it right from the command line. I'm going to do this from the command line just because it makes it a lot quicker for me here. So let me grab this. So there's a program called the DQS installer. and it's here in the bin directory of your SQL Server installation. I already have that here, so I'm just going to actually copy and paste. And I'm actually going to do an install. So I'm just going to do this install here. Install. And when you do the install, it's going to ask you for a master key. You can just make a strong password. That's for any encryption that needs to be done. And so once you do that, it's going to run through this install. I'm doing it this way probably takes 10 or 15 seconds. So once it's complete there, as you can see, it's running right now. And while this is running, it is actually going to create 3 databases. I'm going to let this run in the background for the next 5 or 10 seconds. In the meanwhile, you can see here there are 3 databases that's created by DQS. And this is for the internal workings of DQS. Once we get into this, you'll see that all the data that we are putting into the knowledge base, all the information about the project, it's all stored in these, I guess these could be considered system databases since it's used by the client. Just as a side note, I actually did a project with a client maybe last year who had DQS set up, and they wanted to pull out, do some reporting, and maybe come through these databases just to see what's in it, see, get some reporting on the projects they've been doing. They're not very easy to understand. Like some system databases, maybe you'll have a lot of views. Even SQL Server, maybe you'll have a view, you can select a view. These get pretty complex, just as a note. So just if you're thinking, once you have this set up, you want to go into some of these system databases, start pulling data out, just be aware that it's quite complicated. It can be done, but just as a note. All right, so let's come back here. All right, it should pretty much almost be done now. It's actually loading a default knowledge base, and I believe this is the last step. Yeah, so I was explaining here these 3 databases that are just system databases. Okay, so if I go back here, and now I open up this Data Quality Services client, I'm going to connect. And so here I am, and this is the beginning screen here. It's going to have the knowledge base management and data quality projects, and then the administration. So what I'm going to go through here now is create a sample knowledge base and then go through and show you how to use that knowledge base to cleanse your data. Now the data I'm going to use is actually from Microsoft's tutorial. Maybe some of you guys may have seen this before. Microsoft put out what I think honestly is a very good tutorial on data quality services. It actually has data quality services and also ties into master data services, which we won't get into in this webinar. But actually, I think it's very good. But even if you've gone through this tutorial before, there's just still some value added to this. I'm going to go in depth in some of the things that they don't go into in this tutorial. But I mean, it's a great tutorial because the data that they have there, it's already pre-done data, and it will hit on every point that I want to get here. So I figure why recreate the wheel when I have one here. So we're going to start here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a knowledge base. So we're going to create a new knowledge base, and we're going to create it from scratch. So if you go here, you click New Knowledge Base, and this one here is based off a fictional company, and it's a supplier list from a fictional company. So right now I'm just going to type in suppliers as the name of the knowledge base. Oh, and one side note, when this is over, I'm actually going to post a link to this on my blog. So if you want to actually take this and download it, it's a fairly quick download. There's I'd say about 100 pages of Word document to walk you through these, along with some sample data. But yeah, I said it's even after this, I think it's phenomenal. So I mean, just to learn it. So I've taught this numerous times, and I've always used this same set of data. Okay, so for now we're going to go into suppliers, and what we're going to do is domain management. So this is the first step in creating a knowledge base. You're just going to, what it says, manage your domains. So let's go here and hit next. So what you're going to do is create a list of domains which will coincide with the fields that are coming in your data. So for this one here, I'm just going to go through list. Supplier ID is one of the fields, and there's a list of about 7 here I'll add. But before I do that, I'm just going to touch on some of these options. Description, pretty self-explanatory. You can put a description of each field, or you cannot. It's just there as an option. And you can also select the data type of the data coming in. For this demo, we're just going to use strings for everything, just to make it simple. Use leading values. This one is going to be used for synonyms, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So basically, synonyms are 2 values that mean the exact same thing. So USA versus United States, both equal United States. But we'll get to that a little bit later. And normalized string just ignores the punctuation. And so we have, you can enable spell checking, and you can disable syntax checking for error algorithms. For these, I always say that the defaults are there for a reason. I usually leave most of these defaults. I've never really had a good reason to change them. So usually, if they're defaults and you don't have a great reason for changing them, pretty much just leave them be. Okay, so I'm creating a supplier ID that's going to come in as a string. So you can see now I have a string. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to set up the rest of my domains here. So I'm just going to go through. And these are all going to be the fields that are going to be coming in on my data and the ones I want to use within DQS. And these are all fair. There is nothing out of the ordinary here. These are all things I'm sure we, as data developers, have all seen a million times. Standard, supplier name, ID. Then I'm going to do all of the address fields. So I'm going to do state, and then country and zip. And there we go. So that's it. So now my domains are set up for all of my data coming in. So now we can actually go in and start adding knowledge to this knowledge base to help us in the cleansing process. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with country. And so now I have country selected. I'm going to start with the domain values. The domain values tab is going to show a list of all of the valid values for that particular domain. So for instance, country, you can have a list of all the countries. You can just have United States, maybe you're just a domestic country, or anything in between. So for now, since these are all blank and we're doing this manually, and I'll actually show how you can also automate this process. But for now, we're doing this manually. We want to add a value that's valid. So the obvious thing would be to add United States. So I'll come here to the Add New Domain Value, right-click, and just type United States, spelled correctly. So do that, and so now there are 2 values, DQS null, which means for this particular one, we're allowing null values. If I wanted, I could delete this value, and you wouldn't accept nulls. But for this one, we are. So I just came here and just added a value called United States, and the type is correct. I mean, like I said, nothing too out of the ordinary. So the next one we'll go to state. And same thing here. So we're going to start typing in states, and we can put in all 50 states here. So say I came in here and I typed in New York. Then I could come in here and type in Pennsylvania. Obviously, I could do that, and I'm sure you're all thinking, complete waste of time. You obviously don't want to go in and type every single state in there. So what you can do is, I'm going to delete that. There's actually an option also to import data. So for instance, there's a button here called Import Values. So if you click on this, and you can import values from an Excel. Just a side note, this is one of my personal notes. DQS works with Excel and also works with SQL Server. So when you export data, you can export it to SQL. For some reason, you can only use this part with Excel. So for instance, if I had, for here, I actually put my data in a database here, states to import. These are all the states that I want to import. But for some reason, you can't use it to import it into DQS here. Maybe you're going to change that. This is a very new product, so I'm sure I'm not the only one complaining about it. But for all intents and purposes, this can only be used for Excel. So if I come here, I actually have the Excel file that I'm using with the tutorial. And here I have states to import as a tab, and there just should be exactly 50 of all 50 states. So for now, I'm just going to use this. So I'm going to come back here, import value from Excel. Pretty simple, just select the file name. Just like any other Excel import, it's going to ask for the tab. And first row is headers or not. I don't have a header there, so I'm just going to leave that blank. Click OK. And so I hit OK, and it gives me a little status here that 50 values were imported successfully, 50 total values. Hit OK. And as you can see now, we have all 50 states here in our knowledge base. Okay. So that's how you do a domain value. You can also do what is called a domain rule. And instead of putting in a whole list of values that are valid for a particular domain, you can just set up a rule. I mean, I could come here and set up a rule that says state must start with C, which obviously wouldn't make sense, but if I made a rule there, only these 3 states would be valid. And I'll actually show you that there by, I'm going to add another domain, and I'm going to use a domain for email. So I'm just going to add a domain here, call it email. So what I'm going to do now is set up a rule for an email that emails all have to have the proper ending. So for this one, we're going to use the AdventureWorks, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So if we come here, I'm going to come back into my source data here. So, okay, just so you can see here, all of our email addresses end with adventure-works.com. So for me, that seems like a good rule. So I'm going to come back here into the domain rules section of this email, and I'm going to add a rule. So I'm just going to click the plus sign here. And this plus sign is going to allow me to add a rule. So let me think of a rule. I'll give it a name, and it's with AdventureWorks. You can also have a description if you want. And so here you go. You have a rule. And each rule has to have at least one rule in it. And so I'm going to create a rule here. And you have all of these different options here about the domain that you can apply a rule to. So for instance, the value can be equal to something. It can be not equal to something. You can actually use regular expressions here. That's great for things like telephone numbers and zip codes. If you wanted to use a regular expression, it would have to match a pattern, or the opposite, it doesn't have to match a particular regular expression. For this one here, we're going to use value ends with. So the value has to end with at adventureworks.com. So there is our rule. So every email has to have at adventureworks.com, or else it's going to fail the validation step. And these rules, you can add more and more rules. So you can say, all right, and the length has to be at least 20 characters. And, you know, let's see if I can find another one here. value contains a string ABC. I mean, anything. You can have as many of these as you want. And then what you can do, I'm actually going to delete these. We're going to keep this simple. So once you have a rule, you can actually go and you can actually test the rule here. Let me go here. So here you have a test domain rule section. For this example, it's not really that impressive because it's not too hard to look and see if tbrown@adventureworks.com actually validates against these rules. But in the real world scenario, these rules, they would be fairly complex, and you may have 10 different rules here, and this, and this, and this, or that. And it's time consuming to go through and check if the rule is actually correct and what values are accepted, which ones aren't. So for here, you can just go through and you can just add a value. For this one, I'll just do tbrown@adventureworks.com. Hit that, and you'll see a check mark that says, okay, that's valid. Let's try tbrown@pragmaticworks.com. So this does nothing, but it just tests the rule. This is for while you're creating the rule, it helps you see what's valid and what's not. So now you can see this one won't pass the rule because the end does not end in adventureworks.com. This one here does. So we can close that there. So that there is strictly for testing. It doesn't affect the data or anything. It's just for testing to make sure that's actually correct. All right. So next here, we're going to go to what is called a term-based relation. The best way to describe a term-based relation is, I guess it would be more of a correction. It's a correction of a part of a value. For instance, say I come here to supplier name, and I want to do a term-based relation. So I want to take a part of the value and replace it with something else. So that would be very common with abbreviations. So for this example here, I'm going to add one. And we'll see this a lot. The data comes in, something maybe co. That you want to actually spell out company for that one. So we'll do company here. So when data comes in the supplier name field, and there's a string here that says CO dot, every time you see that, it's going to change the company. So that's the whole point of a term-based relation. So I'm going to add two more they have here that are obviously very common. Corporation. And the next one is incorporated. And done. And these are very common. They're very common names. We see them all the time. And for instance, maybe you could have a person's name. You want to write out Mr. or if the value is MR dot. Or probably more often, you probably want to, if the word Mr. happened to come in, you'd want to change that to MR dot. So this is what term-based relations do. It takes that part, and it will automatically just change those for you. See, next part. Oh, next part we're going to do are synonyms. Okay, we're going to use that with the country domain. So what a synonym does is it takes two domain values, if you define them as synonyms, and it combines them into one value. So for instance, say we come here, we're in country now, and I mentioned just earlier, we have our domain values. United States is the value we have. Obviously, that sometimes the data does not come in as United States. So let's do this. Let's say USA. Okay, so now we have two values. So if United States comes in, it's valid. If USA comes in, it's valid. But they both mean the exact same thing. So if you want to keep your data standard and clean, you don't want some records saying USA and some records saying United States. You want, regardless of which one of these come in, you want to pick a value. And that's what's called a synonym. So what you're going to do is, I can actually add a third one in here if I want to illustrate this, US. So those are 3 values that you would probably see coming in. But for your all intents and purposes, you want only United States. So what you can do is you can actually highlight these. You can actually highlight all 3 of them. And then when you right-click, you're going to have an option. An option called Set as Synonym. So I'm going to go here and set this as a synonym. And there we go. So it's always going to correct to United States, whether USA, US, or United States comes in. And as you can see, these are now corrected to United States. Maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, that's great and all, but I actually want USA to be my leading value, which is the value that everything corrects to, not United States. And so that here, between A and B that are set as synonyms, and you can tell because of the blue bar here, and you can collapse that if you want. That's how you can tell things are synonyms. You can just right-click on any of these, and there's an option called Set as Leading. So you set to leading, and now the leading one's always at the top next to the plus-minus box. So now everything here will correct to USA instead of United States. And I'll set the United States back to leading. And if you wanted to, you can also hit Remove Synonym. Sorry, I did that pretty quick. Let me do that again. You can always go to Synonyms and right-click, and there's an option to remove synonyms. And it does the exact opposite. It will just remove them as synonyms, and now there's 3 separate values. Just a way to reverse that. Okay, so we're back there. We're set as a synonym. And there we go. One last thing I want to do is create a composite domain. What a composite domain is pretty much the same as a domain, but it's made up of multiple domains. So for instance, email is just email coming in from your stores. But say I want to do, the example here would be a domain called complete address. So I can create a domain, and it's right here. There's create domain and create composite domain. And I'm going to call this complete address. So what I'm going to do is I'm creating a domain that's going to be made up of other domains. So the complete address is actually address line, city, state, and zip. I'll just leave those there for now. So what this is now, this is going to actually act as one domain that's comprised of these 4 domains here. And now that you have this composite domain, you can also, a big thing to do with composite domains is you can add rules to a composite domain. So as you see here in the email, when we added a domain rule, all we have here is email. We only can put rules that are related to that email domain. In a composite domain, oops, let me delete that. In a composite domain, when we add a rule, we can actually use multiple domains within it. So now we have address line, city, state, and zip as an option. So I'm going to use the one here. Actually, should I do Los Angeles? Yeah, I'll do Los Angeles. So what this one is, so what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to build a rule that says, for this composite domain, okay, when a city comes in and the city is equal to, and you always have these options for everyone. So yeah, these can get, when you get with composite domains, and then you also start adding more and more of these rules, these can get very, very complex. So that's where the validation part comes in. Like I said, for these, they're fairly simple. But for complex rules, it's to actually be able to validate a particular value on the fly against a set of rules while you're developing is great. So here we're going to say, so if city is equal to Los Angeles, then the state must be equal to CA. So simple rule, whenever the city comes in, if it's Los Angeles, it's just going to check to make sure the state is California. And if that's the case, it will pass, and if that's not the case, it will fail. All right. Just as another side note, when we go through the project here, we're actually going to cleanse the data using this. Anytime it comes across an error, you can manually intervene. For instance, say, I'm not really sure if this is true, but you have Los Angeles, it has to be California. Maybe there's another Los Angeles somewhere in the United States, which is very possible. I just found out there's another Philadelphia in Mississippi. So you would actually see that come through, and you'd be able to handle it accordingly. So maybe you'd want to make it invalid. Maybe you just want to add another rule here that says, all right, well, there's also Los Angeles in New Mexico, some small town in the north. So you would just add a rule here for that. But the good part about this knowledge base is you start with a basic knowledge base, and then as you go on, you just find anomalies like that, or you find rules or things you can change. So you just build on this knowledge base. So this isn't a one-and-done deal. Take it, it's done, deploy it, move on to the next project. It's there, it's always running, and the more data you have coming in and the more you use it, the more information that actually comes into this knowledge base. Okay, so now we have a pretty good knowledge base set up here, and I think we're actually pretty good here. So once you've done all this, you hit Finish, and it's going to ask you to publish the knowledge base, which you hit Publish, and it should publish your knowledge base. So now you can actually refer to the knowledge base in other processes, and you'll see right here you have this knowledge base suppliers. So that's pretty much it with creating a knowledge base. So the next part, obviously, will be to actually use this knowledge base. So to use the knowledge base, you're going to have to create a data quality project. And as I said at the beginning of the webinar, there are actually two ways to do this. One is through a project that I'm going to do now, and one is through SSIS. So I should have time to go through them both. All right. So here we go again. I'm just going to go here to New Data Quality Project. So I'm just going to create a new project here. Clean Data. And so I'm just going to call this project Clean Data. And it's going to ask you to which knowledge base do you want to use. You can have a lot of different knowledge bases on here within your DQS system. So you'd have to select which knowledge base you want to use. So we have our suppliers knowledge base, and we also have one here called DQS Data. DQS Data is just a built-in knowledge base. It has some basic things that most projects would use, so just last name, counties, maybe countries. So you can, if you wanted to create a knowledge base from this basic knowledge base, you could. We just did ours from scratch, but it's there if you want to use it. But for this one, we're actually going to use our suppliers knowledge base. And you can see here it's going to have all the domains. So we have address, city, country, email, state, all of these things. And we also have this here, which is our composite domain, that also includes those. So for right now, we're going to do a cleansing. So we're just going to click cleansing, click next. Okay, so now it's going to come and it's going to ask you for your data source. So now we need to find what is the source of our data that we're going to run through this data quality project. And so here, as I said earlier, you have Excel and you have SQL Server. Like I said, I don't know why SQL didn't work for the knowledge discovery, but hopefully they'll fix that. So I could use either one. I do have Excel, I have SQL Server. I'm more often than not, we're using SQL, so I'm just going to use SQL Server. And I created a database here called Webinar. And incoming suppliers, it's a table I'm going to use. And I'll just show you, like right here, these are just all the suppliers that we're going to pull through the knowledge base to check for any errors according to all of those rules we have. These are all pretty good data. There are some obvious mistakes in here just to show the functionality. But we're going to take this data here and we're going to send it through the knowledge base. So the first thing you can do is you have to map the incoming columns with the domain. So we're just going to, I'm going to go through the list here pretty quickly. Supplier name, we're going to do email address, we'll do the address information, city, state, and if you run out of space here, there's actually a plus sign here. You can just add extra rows to it. So we've got name, address, email, address, city, state. We're going to do country, and set the zip code. So these are all the incoming fields in the source data that I just showed you. And then you have to map them to a domain. So we're going to map, these are fairly obvious. They map to the ones that the name matches. So we're going to do email, do that, state, country, and zip. So there we go. So we're just going to do a match, source to domain. Click next. Okay, so now everything's mapped, everything's ready to go. You come to this page and you're going to actually start the process of cleansing the data. So to do that, just hit start. And now it's just going to take your incoming data and it's just going to apply all the rules and all the knowledge in that knowledge base to the data that you just imported. So that's about it. And so now it's going to show you how many records came in, just some general information here. How many came in, how many values were actually corrected with the knowledge that we have in the knowledge base, how many records are actually invalid. So this is more or less just a summary. So if you hit next, it's going to take you to more of a detailed page. So these are all your domains that came in on the left, complete address, country, email, supplier name. And now you get to go through and actually see what the results are. So we'll start with email. So 40 emails came in on that list. And you'll see 38 of them are new emails. Since there are no, basically DQS doesn't know what to do with these. Since these emails aren't added to the knowledge base, but there are no rules that it breaks. So it's like, all right, this is a new value. So far it looks good. What do you want to do? So for these values here, they all look good. So I'm going to go through here. Yep, everything looks fine. So for this, you can just hit approve all items for this one. So since these are all valid email addresses, I hit approve, hit yes, and then it says, all right, those are all correct now. They've all been approved. And you can actually reject them again if you want to, but for this, they're all approved. And so now there are 2 that are invalid. So now these 2 here are actually invalid. Since they failed that rule, AdventureWorks.com, they're both missing the S. So for this particular one, you can actually come in here and you can change this. So if that's wrong, I'm going to change that to AdventureWorks.com. And see, now it's fixed, because now it says confidence 100%, and this AdventureWorks.com is now going to correct to AdventureWorks.com. I'm going to do the actual same for this one. So now we know that's an invalid address. So no matter how many times this email comes in our data, now that this is part of the knowledge base, DQS knows to change this email address. And setting this up, there is a lot of manual intervention to this. No real way around it. But it's one of those one-and-done things. So once you change a value in the DQF, it's done. It's there. So yeah, setting this up is a bit time-consuming. But once you have a good knowledge base, it's mostly just maintaining, which obviously is a lot easier to do. So we're going to do that. All right. So the two values are okay. So let's see what else we have here. Okay, so we got that for the email. So let's go to country. Okay, so country, we had 3 records that came in for country. None of them were new, none of them were invalid. So we'll see United States, state without the S. That came in, but it was automatically corrected to United States. There are spell checking involved here, so it's just like your Microsoft Word spell checker. It notices that United States should actually be United States, and confidence is 83%, which is fairly good. And yeah, it's just part of the DQS cleansing, so that's fine. And this value USA that came in, since we have those synonyms now, it was corrected to United States, since we said that every time USA comes in with a synonym, it's now United States. So those are both approved, they're okay, and then correct United States came in just as we expected, United States, that's fine. Next one here, we can go to supplier name. And these here are all of our supplier names. Since we didn't set up any rules for supplier name, everything just comes in as new. And then we'll have to either approve or reject them. So some of these here, you'll see that they were changed. For instance, this ADATM Corp. Since we have the term-based relation, Corp is always corporation. INC here is always incorporated. CO is always company. And you can see here, they're actually 100% term-based relation. If you notice the squiggly lines here, some of these are spell checked. So you can see here, these are just corporation names. Maybe it's correct, maybe it's not. It's just spell checker. So you can actually approve those or not. These could actually be real names. So I'm just going to leave them all be. This one here, actually, country store X probably is a misspelling. Like this is one of those manual things you have to do. So if you notice on this misspelled, you can right-click. And if you right-click on it, it's just going to do a standard spell check and suggest some names that may be correct. You can select one of these, or you can type it in here if you want. For this one, we'll just select that. And then you'll see now that this spell check, this incorrect spelling, will always be changed to this one here. So let's do that here. Same thing here. Change that one. And this one here, looks like it's misspelled, supermarket. Okay. And the rest of these we'll leave. So we went through here, we checked all of these. The ones that were misspelled, we changed. Some of these, this one here is also misspelled. And like for instance, maybe this one is actually correct, we'll just leave it be. So everything here looks good. We're just going to hit approve. And you can approve these one by one if you want. For this one, we have 40 values. That may be practical, but if you have 40,000 values in here, and they're all just coming in new, you can just hit approve all items, and it will approve all of your items. So they're all approved too. So that's pretty much it. Oh, forgot one more. Right here, we have our addresses. And once again, it's doing a spell check on an address. You can change some of these if they're incorrect. For all intents and purposes now, I'll just leave them all be. But you'll notice that these are all new because we don't have any addresses in our knowledge base. But then you'll notice that some were actually corrected. And this is the rule that we put in with that composite domain. So you'll see now that there's a Los Angeles, Ohio. There's a Los Angeles, California. There's another Los Angeles, California spelled out. So what I said was if the city was Los Angeles, then the state must be CA. So that's why these 3 states aren't CA. Then that's why they're actually being corrected. And I could also put 2 rules that say, all right, state must be CA or state must be California. Therefore, these 2 would be correct. But for this particular one, we only want states with 2 letters. So these are actually automatically corrected. And since it's part of a rule, approve is already set there because it's pretty sure that that should be corrected. All right, so that should be pretty much it. So now as you went through this entire thing, now they ask, what do you do with the data? DQS doesn't change any data. So especially if you're just learning or you're using data, you don't have to worry about taking your data, putting it through DQS, and then having DQS make a whole ton of changes to your data that you weren't expecting. It doesn't do any of that. What it does is it's just going to create a complete different data set with your cleansed data along with some metadata. So for here, you get to export the data. You have 2 options. You can either export the data or you can export the data with some of the cleansing info. I'm just going to select both so I can show you what some of the cleansing info is. Okay, so SQL Server, and I'm just going to export it here to my webinar database, and so I'm going to call this webinar supplier output. So we'll hit export, and done. So I'm going to come back here to my database, refresh. And here's my table now, webinar supplier output. So let's see what's in here. All right, so here we go. So now you're going to see that all the data is here. But now instead of just the data, for instance, supplier name, first name, email address, you're going to have all this metadata. So you're going to have the source, you're going to have an output, and you're going to have a reason. And some of them may have a confidence level and a status. So what this is, it shows the data coming in, it shows the data coming out, and then it's going to show the reason, any reason that the data was modified. For this one, they're all modified since they're new. And the confidence shows the percentage that it's confident that it's correct. Since we manually corrected it, this confidence is set at 1, which is 100%. And it shows the actual status that it was corrected. Like these were correct. So this one came in, nothing really happened, it was correct. And you can see that for every field. So if we go to another one here, we'll see, for instance, here we go. So now we have some of these emails. This one came in, and this is the output there, but it shows that this one wasn't valid. And it shows this one wasn't valid also. And that's the same for every single row. So for instance, you have this address one here. You can see that the state was, let me move over a little bit. The state came in as California, but it was corrected to CA. So yeah, so you can have all your input data. So if you were actually doing this in the real world example, you would be using all of the output fields. And at the end here, there's also a status of the entire record. So it takes all the information from the record and say, all right, this record's new, or these records are corrected, some of these records are invalid. And that's really helpful if you're using this in an automated fashion. If I can just get a couple minutes left, I can run through. Yeah, so that's how you do it with using the DQS project. There is also there's a component within SSIS. So I created a quick package here just to show you that. So I just put this together here. I can run through this fairly quickly. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I just did, but I'm going to use this, do this in SSIS. So I'm using this incoming suppliers, the same thing that I had there. And there's a task here called, it's the data quality task. It's always hard to find. Oh, there it is. So it's a DQS cleansing task. So what this is going to do is take the source data, and it's going to do the exact same thing I just did, only in SSIS, so you can automate it. So if you come here, it's going to ask you to connect to your DQS client, which I have here. And now that I'm connected, you can see the knowledge base, the basic knowledge base, and the supplier's database. And you can see here, there's all my domains, including my composite domain here. So then what you can do is you can just map columns. So your input columns, and you can map them to the domain just as I did before there. So I'm just going to do supplier name, the email, and just the address information. Make this simple. So you can take all of these, and then you can just map them to the actual domain. Like I said, it's the exact same thing I did, just different way to do it. Do that. And there we go. So what this is going to do is it's going to come take the source, take it through the cleansing using the knowledge base, and then right on the other end is just going to export the cleansed data with all of that extra metadata. So for now, I'm just going to, I'll just put a union all here. That will allow me just to send this out to the buffer. And I'm also going to add a data viewer here. So I'm just going to show you exactly what's coming out. And it's going to be the exact same thing that came out from the project. Let's run that. So now it's just running through that exact same process, and now you can see now when it's done, it is pulling out the same data. And you can see all the corrected data here. Like for instance, state Ohio was changed to CA because the city is Los Angeles. And like I said, same thing we just saw. The one last note I want to make is, so when you get to this point, the most thing you're concerned about is the record status. So what you would do in a real-world situation, you would have, more likely than not, you would handle all these differently. So you would have something here, let's say, a conditional split. So then you'd have a conditional split here, and you would do something like, let's see, so record status equals new. And then maybe you'd have record status equals correct, and vice versa. So if you do that, then you would handle however you want to handle this data once DQS is done. So once it's done, it gives you all the information and information about the data. And then, so for here, then you would obviously do something like this, and then you would handle it accordingly. So you'd maybe have, so you here, like in union all here. So then you would just conditionally split this. So you'd send your correct records here, and maybe your new record here. So then once you have that set up, then you can take DQS, and then you would have to write your own process to actually handle the data that way. But it's good, because then you know what status each record is and handle it accordingly. So, all right, and I think that comes right to 12 o'clock. Thanks for everyone. Sorry about the minor video issue. I got it in just in time. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to email me any questions. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, or not, I'll post it on my blog. So I guess if it's a good question, I can do it so everyone can see it. So thanks again, everyone, for your time, and I will hand it back over to Tammy.
Thank you, Tyrone. Do you have time for questions, or would you like for me to send those over to you so that you can create a blog for us?
Yeah, that would be best. Yeah, because it'll give me a chance to write it up and research everything, and then yeah, I'll post it to my blog, and so everyone can take a look at it when they have time.